Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 3rd. We were spared. Oh, it's April 3rd, 2017. I might as well tell you that. You probably knew that already. And there's no joke about it. We've skipped April Fool's Day on the air. We were spared that. It wasn't April 1st until Saturday, and we were off the air, so we didn't have to deal with trying to figure out whether or not certain stories were real or fake or somebody's idea of an April Fool's joke. But it doesn't matter. Like I said, the weekend news was going to be crazy enough anyway, and now we're in the middle of some sort of presidential anger tweet storm at the moment. I think I caught some of it at some point. Are people reacting to it? I don't know. It's just one of those mornings where Trump thinks he's still in the campaign, and he's yelling about the Clintons, and I don't know what's going on. I didn't even take a look yet. All I saw was this morning the president was tweeting, "Did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers to the debate? Just asking." This, of course, is not how debates actually work. You wouldn't be able to send anybody the answers to anything, but of course he is a bitter, overage schoolboy, and for him, the cheating is when you get the answers sent to you, not the questions ahead of time. Well, all right, so what? I don't know. We'll see what else he's tweeting about. He's also got I don't know what's going on in his head, but this morning, let's see. What's up this morning? Let's see. He stopped last night with a tweet that somebody probably wrote for him about something. Melania and I are honored to light up the White House this evening for World Autism Awareness Day. I doubt very much whether he wrote that one. We should take a look and see where it came from. We might as well obsess about Donald Trump this morning. He is the President of the United States. Believe it or not, it's true. I believe we're in week 11 of The Presidential Apprentice, and so no sign of this letting up anytime soon. Let's see. Did this come from the Android, or does that not tell me anymore? Is it something that Twitter doesn't tell you anymore if you don't... I don't know. I forget how we used to find these things out. My phone used to show me. Anyway, I doubt very much whether he wrote that one. And that was the last thing he did that was somewhat civilized. This morning he woke up and was tweeting around 6 o'clock a.m., I guess. "Such amazing reporting," he writes, "on unmasking and the crooked scheme against us by Fox and Friends. Spied on before nomination. The real story." Of course, as we tweeted over the weekend from Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, even though we were off for the weekend, sentences, how do they work? He just said that he was spied on. There was a crooked scheme against him by Fox and Friends, but he meant that the reporting was by Fox and Friends, which can't be true because they don't do reporting, but okay. So amazing, whatever. Dave Weigel over the weekend also took note. Imagine being the President of the United States and having access to the most sensitive classified information in the world and choosing instead to sit on the couch and watch Fox and Friends for your information. Such a couch potatus. It's unbelievable. I love that nickname for him. It describes him perfectly. A TV watching lout with no interest whatsoever in the broad array of actual information that's being offered to him. I want nothing to do with that. I want to see what's on TV. Hey, what's on TV today? Duh. It's just that stupid. All right. I mean, I like TV, but come on. Then 2 hours ago, he was tweeting, "Was the brother of John Podesta paid big money to get the sanctions on Russia lifted, and did Hillary know?" I'm not even sure what that one is supposed to be about, but Justice was interested in that one, tweeted that one to me this morning. And then finally, not finally, no. 2 hours ago, did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers in the debate? He's just aggrieved about everything. The guy who supposedly won the election just cannot let go of the grievances that made no difference whatsoever in the election. And then finally, Fox News from multiple sources. There was electronic surveillance of Trump and people close to Trump. This is unprecedented. And then he attaches the FBI on that one because he doesn't know any other way to communicate with the FBI because he's only the president of the United States. This moronic lout sitting in the White House. By the way, just to go back to the other one, last night he tweets that with the Melania and I are honored to light up the White House. Melania's not in the White House. She's not honored to tweet anything or light anything up. She's in Trump Tower, which I'm sure isn't lit up, but is being guarded at a cost of $500,000 a day. All right. Well, anyway, Greg Dworkin is here. That means it's time for me to find the other half of my Pop-Tart and listen to the news, like the president. Good morning,
hey,
Greg.
Pop-Tarts.
That's right. Hey, turn the channel. It's a commercial.
Yeah, here
I'm
we
the
go.
President,
You know,
God damn it. All right. What?
first of all, how's my sound? I got my new headset and replaced the headphone.
It sounds great. There's no static whatsoever.
I think it was the wire. Apparently, this is my third one since we started the show, and they just get used up.
Yeah, I think that's just the case.
But good news. You talked me into getting a professional microphone, and it should arrive this afternoon in time for Wednesday's show.
That is excellent. We'll see whether that's appreciably different. I hope so. My hope is to
it'll
be
take
able
up
to...
more room on my desk for sure, even with the boom. So,
That's enough.
We'll see.
That's really that's the main point, is to take up more room on the desk. And if it sounds appreciably different, we'll be very excited. We can say capital improvements being made to the Kagro in the Morning show.
Right. It also has this little round filter, a pop filter.
Yes.
That is between you and the microphone.
Right.
So that certain vowels, when you sing, don't pop.
Ah.
I guess that's why it's called a pop filter.
I guess so. Don't sing.
Yeah, so I won't sing. Don't worry.
My pop filter fell off a while ago, and I haven't found another one. So
you definitely shouldn't sing then.
Right. Well, you can believe that's not happening.
Right.
Melania and I would be honored, but we're not going to do it.
Don't worry. I won't sing for you or the audience. But we do have some interesting things to talk about today. For example, I sent you a little graphic, which is also part of the Pundit Roundup, just as a reminder. Today is Monday, April the 3rd. And at 9 o'clock tonight on PBS is the documentary Newtown, which is a searing portrait of what happened in Newtown after the massacre, which was some years ago now. Which reminds me, I've been doing this show with you for some years now, because I think I was on the following week after the Newtown shooting, and that was a while ago.
Yeah. End of 2012.
Right, and this is 2017, so it was 4.5 years ago. So and I was doing the show before that, so I've been on a long time.
Yeah.
Are we getting old
keep
or
doing
what?
This. I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm suffering from delusions. I keep thinking Donald Trump is president.
Yeah, well,
I must be older than I thought.
It happens.
He thinks he is too. That's the funny part.
But before we get to some of the other parts of the news, which are basically centered around the fact that Trump is a complete and competent fool, I also thought I'd throw in this just for a different thing, a quick tweet storm from J.K. Rowling, since we're talking about being on the show.
The new book?
No, just advice for authors.
Okay.
Which I thought was useful. But it's also advice for anybody trying to do something new and creative, like Kagro in the Morning, for example. It says, there were so many times in the early 90s, she writes, when I needed somebody to say this to me. It's great advice for many reasons. And the advice is, hey, you're working on something and you're thinking nobody's going to watch or read or listen, but finish it anyway. That was the advice.
I think, that's pretty good advice. Yeah, I guess in the early 90s.
She says, look, even if it isn't a piece of work that finds an audience, it'll teach you things you could have learned no other way. And I'm reading this and thinking about the show, of course, thinking about blogging as well when I write, but thinking about doing the show with you. And by the way, she writes, just because it didn't find an audience, it doesn't mean it's bad work. She says, the discipline involved in finishing a piece of creative work is something on which you can truly pride yourself.
I'll agree.
You'll have turned yourself from somebody who's thinking of or who might have or who's trying to somebody who did. And once you've done it, you know you can do it again. And that's an extraordinary, empowering piece of knowledge, so don't ever quit out of fear of rejection. Maybe your 3rd, 4th, 50th song, novel, painting will be the one that makes it, that wins the plaudits, but you'd never have gotten there without finishing the others, all of which will now be of more interest to your audience.
That's true.
Here endeth today's sermon. So, there's no way you could really learn how to do a radio show until you do a radio show. And for all you listeners out there who are thinking about maybe sending David a little snippet of sound about your particular state and what's going on there politically or anything else you want to send him, because we do have people that do that, go ahead and do it. Just because you've never done it before, that shouldn't stop you. Do it, and then when you learn how to do it, maybe you'll do it again, and do it again, and do it till you feel like you're getting better at it.
That's right. And if you do it over and over again, and I play them over and over again, everyone will get the impression that you're doing a good job at it, even if you still think you're not.
But it's just good advice for everybody in anything and everything you're trying to do.
I would say so. Yeah, it's funny to think about someone like J.K. Rowling. Occasionally, I do think about that the before they became famous thing. She spent a decent part of her adulthood walking around saying, "Yeah, I write novels and nobody reads them," and wondering when that big break, or whatever, if it would ever come. And you just don't magically turn into somebody whose every book is a bestseller.
Right.
And, very interesting perspective.
Anyway, let's turn to politics here. And I got a piece from Leonard Pitts Jr. from the Miami Herald, which I think was pretty interesting. It's from a couple days ago, but it's entitled, believe it or not, "The Media Owe Trump a Debt of Gratitude." They
owe Trump a debt. That's incredible. Gratitude, that's just superfluous.
Well, here's what he says. "We did a lousy job, and the gist of why he's thanking Trump is it's been exposed.
Oh.
Doubtless, there were journalists who would disagree with that assessment of how news media performed during the 2016 campaign, but I've never met one.
Uh-huh.
The consensus among those I know is coverage of that campaign represents journalism's biggest fail since the run-up to the Iraq War. The culprit, of course, is our handling of the unconventional candidate who became president. Among our sins, failure to take him seriously enough early, relying too heavily on flawed polling, spending more time covering personality than policy, providing him untold hours of free advertising on certain cable news networks, and not even requiring him to show up in person to collect it." You agree?
Yes. No? I don't know. Yes, I would to some extent, certainly.
Perhaps most critically, we embraced a false equivalence. We behaved as if Hillary Clinton's shifting explanations for the use of a private email server, troubling though they were somehow as ominous and potentially consequential as Donald Trump's mendacity, crudeness, incompetence, and overall unfitness, which is basically the theme for today's show.
Okay.
So,
I can handle that.
In our defense, he says, we had never seen anything like him and had no idea how to cover him.
That's definitely true.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I maybe. It's true that they had never seen anything like him, but they should have learned how to cover him. They had a year. They could have looked at Italy and see how they covered Berlusconi. They could have looked at Argentina. They could have looked at Venezuela. They could have looked at a whole bunch of other places and just not been so convinced of their own infallibility.
So I shouldn't have agreed.
So you shouldn't have agreed.
Oh, well.
Right?
They should have
like everybody else, I thought Clinton was going to win. I thought the polls were right. I didn't see Comey coming.
That's true. I don't think anybody saw that coming.
Nobody saw it. And so that did change things. But still, Donald Trump should have been covered in a way that was really more appropriate in terms of his failings. And Clinton should not have been covered the way she was. That was really just horrible. And it still remains horrible. I saw it today. I turned it on before I turned it off. And Morning Joe was just ranting about how this election was never about Donald Trump. He was just a bit player. It was all about how everybody hates Hillary. And went on for like 20 minutes about how he hates Hillary. And Mika threw in the part about, after the grab them by the pussy tape, I knew it was going to hurt Clinton because it was going to remind everybody about Bill. And that's just nonsense. It's complete and total nonsense.
Well,
she won 3 million more votes than he did, which is the way you know it's nonsense. It's their own projection on how everybody else felt, except everybody else didn't feel the way they did.
Why did it sound so good and make me agree when Pitts wrote that paragraph, though? That doesn't make any sense. Now I'm confused. Except for the part about relying on flawed polling, which I don't. I guess.
Well,
that
actually,
one
the
I would
national
say.
polling was right on the money,
Yeah,
too.
I mean that part I would say. All right, well, I don't necessarily relying heavily on polling. If you think you relied too heavily on it, maybe that's bad. But the flawed polling part, I don't know. It sounded like it was actually kind of right, but I don't know. The rest of it sounded like okay. But I remember feeling that you did those things. Why am I not? Why wouldn't I agree with that now?
Well, let's go back and see what he wrote. Perhaps most critically, we embraced a false equivalence. We behaved as if Hillary Clinton's shifting explanations for the use of a private email server, troubling though they were somehow as ominous and potentially consequential as Trump's mendacity, crudeness, incompetence, and overall unfitness. And they did do that, and that was horrible, and they should feel guilty about that.
Okay, well good then. I like that.
So he goes on to say,
I
look,
agreed
it's
with
3
the part
months
before
into
this.
the presidency, and we're starting to figure it out, he says.
Okay.
Time magazine is out with a cover asking, is truth dead? Trump's White House cites Andrew Napolitano of Fox News as a source for the ludicrous contention that the British helped Obama wiretap him. Fox admits it cannot substantiate it, and he disappears from the air. That's another example.
Yes.
Wall Street Journal has an editorial that describes Trump as clinging to the wiretap assertion like a drunk to an empty gin bottle.
Yes.
That's the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, true. That's unusual for them, usually with a Republican president. Also,
Right.
gin.
Right? He won't call it a lie in the Wall Street Journal, but they do that. So that's the background. I have this piece from Josh Kraushaar, which is normally behind a paywall, but it's free till next week.
Oh, boy.
Called The Ever-Shrinking Trump Presidency. The president's ineffective threats against the Freedom Caucus show that he wields little clout just 2 months into his term, which, by the way, is true.
Yes.
And he talks about that the fact that the Republican unity is shattered. There is no such thing. He splits the Republican Party, Josh does, into 3 factions. The pragmatists,
Okay, yes.
the Trumpian populists,
Trumpian. All right.
and the hard-right maximalists.
Fair enough.
So the Trumpian populists would be people, I guess, like, what's his name, Chris Carroll, or I forget his name, Chris Collins,
Kringle.
the New York Republican, upstate New York Republican, who was the first congressional person to sign on to the Trump train.
Oh,
Doesn't
yeah.
always agree with him, but, he's definitely a Trumpian populist. We have the pragmatists, like Charlie Dent, who is often labeled a moderate. He's not, because there are no Republican moderates. But compared to everybody else, I suppose he is. And he's somebody who would prefer not to, for example, get rid of the Affordable Care Act because he's got constituents who need it. That's what they mean by pragmatists.
I see.
And then they have the hard-right maximalists. We're talking about the Freedom Caucus. Unwilling to make the compromises necessary to govern effectively. So that's pretty good 3 factions. I think that's a pretty good split.
Yeah, there's some overlap, but those are some good lines.
Mm-hmm. So he says, as president, Trump could have been the glue holding the parties together, but no.
I don't like glue.
No, so that didn't work at all.
They haven't got a glue.
I haven't got a clue about what's going on here. Now, before I get to the LA Times series of editorials, it's 4 parts of which 2 have been published, I also want to mention this McKay Coppins article, which was in The Atlantic, called The Republican Identity Crisis. A conservative by any other name would still be confused about where they fall on the ideological spectrum in the Trump era. Confusing times to be a Republican. And he gives some example. Where are you on the libertarian-authoritarian divide? One of the most common responses I received from Republicans, because he asked a whole bunch of people, what's going on with your party, argued that the party could be divided between authoritarians who gravitate toward Trump and libertarians who are generally repelled by the strongman instinct. In an email that was typical of several, Aaron L.M. Goodwin from California wrote, I grew up in a pretty conservative household. We were homeschooled Mormons. We listened to conservative talk radio. I was the only 10-year-old I know of who loved to watch C-SPAN. I feel completely alienated from the GOP, but I don't feel like the one who sold out. So where does that leave me? I believe the conservative liberal spectrum has been overtaken by the Democratic authoritarian one. Most of the Republicans I still feel some kinship with are from a multitude of ideologies, but they share an ideology based on classical liberal democracy and a deep-seated suspicion of rule by power, and I believe are closer to the original intent of our founding documents. So there's a libertarian on the side of the libertarian-authoritarian split.
Okay.
Here's a different one, Liz Mayer. Grievance-motivated versus philosophically motivated. Liz Mayer, a libertarian-leaning GOP strategist, remember she was fired by the Trump team, wrote that she'd been convinced after 300 gazillion conversations with all sorts of conservatives, including a range of lawmakers, writers, pundits, candidates, and grassroots-level activists, that the biggest division within the party is one that separates Fox News, aholics, driven by tribal grievance, from people who have some kind of philosophically rooted belief system. So if you're a Fox News devotee and you get all your news from Fox News, you're basically a know-nothing.
Well, that's true.
And that's different, let's say, than the never-Trumpers who are philosophically motivated. A Philip Klein, for example, conservative policy wonk, most interested in healthcare, for example. Or a Noah Rothman who writes a commentary. These are philosophical conservatives who just want to have no part of what's going on with Trump because they're not grievance motivated. They're right, but they don't get all upset about it. They're always right. They're just, never in the majority, but they just would rather be right, We know people on our side who are the same way. And then there's the anti-establishment group, the outsider-insider stuff, and you've heard all about that. And the flaw in this formulation, it seems to the author, McKay Coppins, it seems to me, he writes, is that virtually every Republican who has entered Congress over the past 8 years started out on the anti-establishment end and then slid involuntarily into the establishment end. That's because, as Stephen Spiker from Virginia emailed, once you run for office and win, you're part of the system.
Well, that's true.
All right. And then there's the absolutists versus the deal makers. That's pretty straightforward. Freedom Caucus are the absolutists.
Oh, yes.
This one is one of the more interesting ones. Then there's the open intolerant versus the nativist and racist. And this is probably the most provocative one.
/tolerant versus, okay. Am I the open intolerance? Like, those are deplorables.
Tolerant.
Okay. They are open and tolerant, and they are pitted against the other axis, or the other end, nativist, racist.
Yeah.
Okay.
For many Trump-averse Republicans, one of the biggest perceived differences between themselves and hardcore Trump fans is attitudes toward racial minorities and foreign immigrants. I mention this again because of our ongoing discussion, three-way with Armando, about whether all Republicans are nativist and racist. And they're not. Unfortunately, the majority is. But there are people that aren't. For many Trump-averse Republicans, one of the biggest perceived differences between themselves and hardcore Trump fans is attitudes toward racial minorities and foreign immigrants. The alt-right dominates one end, and they place themselves on the opposite end. Granted, this spectrum was not proposed to me by any Trump supporters, and no doubt many of them would strongly disagree with this categorization. But there's no question it's one of the defining debates inside the party right now. Even Evan McMullen, a conservative who ran for president last year under the Never Trump banner, was quoted in October saying that racism was the single biggest problem with the party. And he's right.
Yes. That's a great observation, too, that no Trump supporter, or hardly anybody, will acknowledge that that's a division, that that's a real issue among Republicans, which, of course, means it's the most important one there is.
Right, that's part of it, and part of it is the tribal. I'm not going to tell you what our biggest flaw is because why should I tell you?
Because you're wearing a hat that says it.
This is true. Anyway, I thought that was one of the more interesting pieces.
Yes.
There's more than three divisions, as the way Josh Krasauer described it. This is a different, more philosophical division, and I think interesting in and of itself.
I think so. That's I'm fascinated just by the observation. It's quite right that it's one of the most important ones, and it's the one they will not acknowledge. Mm-hmm. That tells us an awful lot.
Mm-hmm. It does. Now, this is from the LA Times, and it's a 4-part series.
Part heard a lot 1, about this. Okay.
Our Dishonest President editorial. Part 2 today, Why Trump Lies. Part 3 is Tuesday, and Part 4 is Wednesday, and we don't know what they're going to write yet because it's not Tuesday or Wednesday. It's only Monday.
Wow. So there's more surprises to come. I heard about the first one.
Mm-hmm. And the second one came out today. So the first one is Our Dishonest President. It was no secret during the campaign that Donald Trump was a narcissist and a demagogue who used fear and dishonesty to appeal to the worst in American voters. The Times called him unprepared and unsuited for the job he was seeking and said his election would be a catastrophe. Still, nothing prepared us for the magnitude of this train wreck. Like millions of other Americans, we clung to a slim hope that the new president would turn out to be all noise and bluster, or that the people around him in the White House would act as a check on his worst instincts, or that he would be sobered and transformed by the awesome responsibilities of office.
Awesome, man.
Instead, and the rest follows.
Yeah.
It's increasingly clear these hopes were misplaced. So he's awful. It's impossible to know where his presidency will lead or how much damage he will do to our nation, it says.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And that's true.
Yes.
That's dangerous
no
and very
limit.
worrisome. And that was the first day. The second day was why Trump lies. He didn't invent the lie and is not its master. Lies have oozed out of the White House for more than 2 centuries, out of politicians' mouths, likely as long as there has been human speech. But amid all those lies told to ourselves and to one another in order to amass power, woo lovers, hurt enemies, and shield ourselves against the often glaring discomfort of reality, humanity has always had an abiding respect for truth. And then Trump comes along. Even American leaders who lie generally know the difference between their statements and the truth. Richard Nixon said, "I am not a crook," but by that point most have seen that he was. Bill Clinton said, "I didn't have sexual relations with a woman, but knew that he did." The insult that Donald Trump brings to the equation is an apparent disregard for facts so profound as to suggest that he may not see much practical distinction between lies if he believes they serve him and the truth. Now, his approach succeeds because of his preternaturally deft grasp of his audience. Though he's neither terribly articulate nor a seasoned politician, he has a remarkable instinct for discerning which conspiracy theories and which quasi-news service and source, or which of his own inner musings will turn into ratings gold. He targets the darkness, anger, and insecurity that hides in each of us and harnesses them for his own purposes. If one of his lies doesn't work, he just lies about that.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe that makes me think that it's not a talent, as they put it, that he doesn't have a preternaturally deft grasp of it, but so much as he flings whatever he can at the walls, and one, he sees what sticks, and then he tells you the stuff that doesn't stick stuck.
Well, yeah, to me, I would put it a different way while agreeing with you, and that is that the difference between him and the others, including a Richard Nixon, is Trump has zero shame.
That's definitely true.
Completely shameless, doesn't mind if he's caught lying his butt off, because it doesn't matter to him. It matters to everybody else, but it matters not one bit to him. Nixon wanted the veneer of a successful politician who told the truth and was annoyed if people didn't see it that way. Trump just doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, he's annoyed.
I'm a liar. Well, that's not the point. The point is it's sold.
Yes, that's true. I mean, he does mind being... he does, pay a great deal of attention to what people think of him and that sort of thing. But, yeah, the Nixon, when he lied, it was important to him that people believe his lies. And I'm not even certain that it's important to Trump that people believe his lies. He
doesn't care. The whole thing is to defend his ego.
Yeah. Get out of my face. Give me money.
Well, here's other examples they give. If his own ego is threatened, if broadcast footage and photos show a smaller sized crowd at his inauguration than he wanted, then he targets the news media, falsely charging outlets with disseminating fake news and insisting against all evidence that he's proved his case. Yeah. If his attempt to limit the number of Muslim visitors to the U.S. degenerates into fiasco, absolute fiasco, and a display of his administration's incompetence, and he falsely asserts that terrorist attacks are underreported. If he detects his audience may be wearying of his act, or if he worries about a probe into Russian meddling in the election that put him in office, he tweets in the middle of the night the astonishingly absurd claim that President Obama tapped his phones. When evidence fails to support him, he dispatches his aides to explain that by phone tapping, he obviously didn't mean phone tapping.
Right, of course not.
Instead of backing down when confronted with reality, he insists his rebutted assertions will be vindicated as true at some point in the future. And then, it doesn't say it here, but he recruits people like Devin Nunes to go make the point for him, so he doesn't have to argue it entirely himself.
Yeah. which we now have a whole new set of problems that threatened his presidency that didn't even have to start. It did, but it was all generated to cover for his inability to say, "Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said that."
Right. Goes on to say, it's not merely amusing, he's dangerous. His choice of falsehoods, his method of spewing them, often in tweets, are a clue to Trump's thought processes and perhaps his lack of agency. That is to say, he's a completely incompetent buffoon who should not be in that office, is what they're trying to say. He gives every indication he's as much the gullible tool of liars as he is the liar in chief. He made himself the stooge, the mark for every crazy blogger. And I will remind you, Alex Jones thought that the Newtown massacre was fake.
Right.
And that's one of his advisors, and that's where he gets a lot of his insane conspiracy theory from, and validates it in his own mind because he says it's true and he's the president. So there's many things that I will not forgive Trump for, but that's probably top of list. If Americans are unsure which Trump they have, does it really matter? In either case, he puts the nation in danger by undermining the role of truth in public discourse and policy making, as well as the notion of truth being verifiable and mutually intelligible. So now we're going to talk about alternative facts on behalf of China, North Korea, and a bunch of other stuff where it really matters. And it's a big, big, big deal.
Yes.
So I still shake my head and say, I heard what Joe Scarborough said about how he personally hates Clinton. I still don't get it. The difference between the two in terms of who's competent and who is, capable of serving and who isn't is on display every damn day. And it just gets worse and worse.
Yes. Did we find out, did they actually come to a conclusion about why Trump lies? Or I feel like we got a lot about the fact that he does and how horrible it is.
Oh, it's to defend his ego. He can't stand losing. He can't stand being told he's wrong.
Okay. I guess that's one reason. I've heard a couple of them, including sort of, I guess, the different angle of, well, where does he get the idea that it's okay to do this, or where did he learn to be so to engage in the kind of outrageous puffery that he does, and that being attributed to his real estate background. But
I personally, as a physician, feel it's unethical to discuss his psychological failings without interviewing and having a professional go over it. But there's no question that the answer to the question of why he lies so much has to do with his psychological damage. Just a question of which one you want to hone on.
All right, well, I think we can do that from a distance and say there's clearly something going on with him and his ego and just his general mentality, but what exactly it is, there we can still say, we're being professional about this. We're not going to tell you exactly what his disorder is until we speak with him. But that he's got one, that seems pretty obvious.
Right. So before I leave, let me just throw in two newsy kind of pieces, which are interesting. One is the new DNC head, Tom Perez.
Yes, that guy.
Who insulted Trump and GOP leaders by saying the GOP doesn't give a crap about people.
That is true.
They got mad at him and asked him to apologize, and of course he said, no way, because it's true.
Yeah, it is. If they think it's not, I would challenge them to produce those craps, and let's have a look.
Mm-hmm. So Dave Weigel has this piece about it, and in his, it's just so odd. Analysis, Tom Perez won't apologize for insulting Trump and GOP leaders. Democrats have undergone a tonal shift since their stinging 2016 defeat, which I would point out was powered by James Comey, upping the aggression and leaving the high ground behind as they target Trump and the GOP. So it's all about Democrats upping the aggression and leaving the high ground behind, which is such a stupid construct to begin with.
Okay. Where did he write this?
This is in the tweet that he sent out, and I'll just send that to you so you can see it for yourself.
I saw that he was
saying
he
wasn't
apologize, but I was like, well, yeah, I don't. So what? So he won't. Was he supposed to? Is there a...
So you're saying that Clinton took the high ground? And people were attacking him. Where did she take the high ground? She spent the entire election dumping on Donald Trump. Well, actually, she was just telling the truth about Donald Trump. And in terms of the WikiLeaks and the crap that was dumped on the Clinton campaign, there's really very little comparison between who was taking the high ground and who not. And the fact that it didn't work to take the high ground is, in the eyes of those who only look at politics as theater critics, the key to everything. You didn't win, therefore you were wrong.
Yeah.
And, I just find that annoying to begin with. You couldn't have been lying because you won, says Trump. If it was such a big deal that I didn't release my taxes, how can you say it's wrong? Because I won.
Right.
If you said I told lies during the campaign, what difference does it make? I won. If that's the only lens which you're going to look at politics through, then you're going to do awful analysis. So talking about who's got the high ground and who doesn't have the high ground, I don't even understand why that's part of the discussion.
I don't know.
It's either right or it's not right. It's correct or it's not correct.
Yeah. I don't know how you even decide on it. I mean, if it's moral high ground, well, yeah, you'll never settle that. I mean, there are people who really believe
that's
that
something
Trump
for
is on.
pundits to write about that has little to do with,
So.
like daily life. Anyway, so there's that with the Perez thing, which I thought was semi-interesting. And then the other thing that I thought was, let's see if I could find it, somewhat semi-interesting, was Jared Kushner.
Yeah, that guy.
Who has been tasked apparently with running the government.
Everything.
Right?
Yes.
He's been sent to Iraq. He's going to be dealing with
run their
China
government.
rather than the Secretary of State.
Or the president.
This guy is totally unqualified to do any of that.
Oh. Damn.
And Trump is so beleaguered, so in the bunker, and so can't trust anyone that the only one he turns to is his family. So he's basically said to Ivanka, you do the women's stuff and some of the domestic issues, and Jared, you go and take care of the world. I'm going to sit here and watch Fox News and tweet.
Who's watching the grandkids?
Well, hire somebody. It's not my problem.
I guess so. Well, yeah, there's a lot of that going around.
And people voted for this guy.
Yes. Well, some people had strange reason to do so. I saw this morning, I don't know whether it happened this morning or happened last night, but circulating a clip. They've brought Mike Huckabee's daughter, Sarah, out to let everybody know that nepotism is A-OK and we should all be celebrating it. So Mike Huckabee's daughter is on TV on behalf of the Trump campaign to tell you it's okay for Trump to hire his daughter and his son-in-law to do all the work of government. And we ought to be happy about that for some reason. I'm not quite certain why she said we were supposed to celebrate it, but I didn't see the clip. I didn't listen to it. I saw it. I saw her face moving. That's all I know. I haven't heard the sound.
So meanwhile, this morning, April 3rd at 7:21 a.m., Donald Trump tweets, "Did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers to the debate? Just asking."
Yes.
The election ended 146 days ago, writes Evan Siegfried, conservative Republican. You won. Why are you doing this?
I do not know. He had to, I don't know. It was like he felt like he had a quota of tweets to meet this morning.
It's more along the lines of he's got to find some way that he won because he's losing everything else.
Yeah.
It's really getting pounded
like
right now,
high
both
school
in the
stuff.
press. We read that editorial, two-parter out of four-parter from the L.A. Times. Everybody's looking at him and saying, this guy is like a complete disaster, has no respect in Congress. The Freedom Caucus is telling him to go take a walk. And he's got to go back to, well, I won something. Let me go back and dwell on that. I'm just going to focus on the way I won and the one thing that I won. And every time somebody tells me I'm not doing my job or that the house is on fire or that, this is just falling around my ears, I'm going to say, yeah, but I won this and keep bringing it up because it's the only thing I have to cling to.
Well, that's sort of, that's been his MO always, of course. And I guess we're learning more about that this morning. It is pretty amazing. It reminds me of the, I keep thinking of the old, the skits on Saturday Night Live with Chris Farley doing the interviews but he was the scared kid who kept just saying, you remember when we did that thing? That was awesome. And he just stuck on that. And he's got nothing else. Or else, maybe some sort of glory days fixation. There was this time when something happened and it seemed like it was in my favor. And all these things that are happening now that are such disasters, well, I don't know. I'm just going to point to these things. Jen Hayden, our own Jennifer Hayden, said this morning. I think she's got a point here. In response to Trump's tweet, this is the point in time where I would advise a friend to consider getting a restraining order. Think
Right.
about it, Hillary Clinton. I mean, this guy's now qualifies as stalker in chief.
Yeah, total obsession. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. And that's it for today from me, but hopefully the sound quality is a little bit better. We fixed our issue here. And I thank you for allowing me to be on the show for all these years. Watch Newtown tonight if you can. You'll see a lot of my friends.
All right. Where can we
And
catch it
you'll
again?
see Monty Frank, the bike messenger. You'll see Bill Begg, who's the ER doc, who was there at the time.
Messenger.
And, of course, you'll see a lot of the families. And they're the main focus, as they should be. So take care. And I will talk to you on Wednesday. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend Kagro in the morning, and thanks so much for listening, folks.
Thank you. Does the graphic that you sent, does that have the viewing information for the?
Yep.
Okay, I'll take that and I'll repeat it for everybody here. Oh, it's a GIF. I have to
It's
download.
basically PBS at 9 o'clock tonight.
That's the answer. Okay, I'll take that. Yeah, it's not opening up the graphic as easily as I.
Well, it's at the top of the pundit roundup, too, so if you want to open that, you'll see it right
you
there.
did say that. Well, everyone can find it there, certainly. And we'll remind everybody. So PBS, which Trump wants to close
Right.
tonight at
but,
9.
But he won't close it by tonight, so
Right.
watch it tonight.
You'll get a chance. He can't do it in one day. It's nothing
Right.
he can
Talk
do.
to you Wednesday.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg. We will see you then. And, look here. Now they want me to rate the overall quality of the call. Where were you last week? But it wasn't your fault. Maybe they knew that and why they asked me. They didn't. So this one was excellent. We'll say it was fantastic, terrific, wonderful, world-class, really beautiful. Everyone loves it. And move on from there. Let's see where to even start. Trump golfed again. He was playing golf again this weekend. Just want to note that for the record. I believe I'm losing count, and I think maybe that's the point of all this. And I don't know whether, by my count, I think it was 13 trips to the golf course, but I did see somebody tweet yesterday that it was 14. So he was once again out in this direction. Thankfully, it was a little too gray and cloudy for him to hit the golf links on Saturday, which was fine because we were out, like I said, delivering Boy Scout mulch, and we would have been right in the area, and it was a fairly serious chance had he decided to go out to his golf club, even just for the half hour of watching the Golf Channel in the grill room. I don't know how thrilled they would have been with rented panel trucks full of they don't know what, driving around. I mean, what we could open it, take a look. It's mulch. It's a truck full of Boy Scouts. You can let us through. We're no threat, etc. But I could see that. I don't know what the road closure situation is around the golf club. It hasn't. They don't seem to have a huge perimeter established, but I don't know. We would be driving in and out of the neighborhood, and people whose homes back up to the golf course where we would have been laying down mulch there, and I don't know. Anyway, thankfully he waited until Sunday, and we were done with our delivery. That was a hell of a day, by the way. Let's see. I mean, I think we moved something like 13,000 bags of mulch, and I was out there from 7 a.m. to just about 9 p.m. I got the assignment of the resupply, the mulch yard, cleaning out trucks as they came in from deliveries and reloading them for the next rounds. And so I got all the fun stuff and all the dirt and all the sweat. And boy, am I sore. So I don't know. It's a bit of a struggle for me to even crawl over to the microphone today. But once I'm in position, I'm okay. I just can't move from here. And I'll just stay here, and someone will bring me something to eat later and turn the microphone on again tomorrow. That's basically how I'll do. So I missed all the news and thankfully missed any contact with our news maker in chief. But I did put aside a number of things, and it's time to open up Pocket and remind myself, because I was so exhausted. I forgot all the things I put aside. So let's see what did I think was noteworthy over the weekend. Yes. Let's see. In addition to everyone talking about and tweeting around the LA Times editorial with a bunch of fire emojis, we also have the other article tweeted around with, I could say, equal number of, well, maybe more poop emojis than fire emojis for the New York Times and their latest entry in the "We All Have to Reach Out and Understand Trump Voters" category, entitled "In Trump Country, Shock at Trump Budget Cuts, but Still Loyalty." I assume by now you will either have read that or will have had your fill of reaction to it. But I don't know. It was out there. Everyone needs to acknowledge that it was out there and that there's some stuff we can take away from it and some stuff we can dismiss, just as there are some people that there might be a reason to talk to about what they were doing or what they were thinking when they voted this way, and some people that there are not. But it basically comes down to, once again, here are a bunch of white people whose regrets are, I didn't think he meant my government program. I thought he meant their government programs. And essentially, I mean, in addition to the whole, well, we need to reach out and understand thing, or trope, I guess I should just label it already, I would say, I don't even know whether I feel like I need to reach out and understand some of this stuff anymore. And some of this stuff predates Trump by a long shot. This is just plain old vanilla gimmitarianism. Once again, the loudest voices screaming about the need to eliminate government programs don't know or are just in denial or really never had a clue in the first place how many government programs they depend on. And then if you show it to them, their main options are to deny that it's a government program, or if you can get them to admit that it's a government program, they say, okay, but it's a government program that makes sense because it benefits me and I'm a good person. Whereas the terrible programs that benefit other terrible people are terrible. You see, they're very insistent that it be labeled terrible. And ask them, well, what sorts of things are you thinking of? And, well, this is a good litmus test. If Obama phones comes up, that's a deplorable. And you can't deal with that person. And yet, they are the very people in some cases who were supposed to be convinced can be talked out of it or might swing away from Trump. But I don't know. If Obama phones comes up, I think you're pretty much beyond redemption, but I don't know. Some of them have grandchildren, so you gotta like them. They're all American. They're white. They have grandchildren, gray hair. Come on, it's fantastic. How do you, right? So okay, let's see. There's once again a Washington Post piece that just will not save right, no matter what I do with it, out of pocket. It's the damnedest thing, and so now I guess I'll have to just stop trying to save articles. Washington Post, you've done something terrible. When I try to save an article I open in my phone on Twitter to Pocket, it simply saves the Washington Post front page. And I have to try and remember what was it that I was interested in. I think it was, I don't know if I'll be able to find the thing, but I believe there was an article by a writer who used to write for the New York Observer, which was a Jared Kushner publication. And the thrust of the article was, I used to work for Jared Kushner. He is exactly the wrong type of person to run the let's reinvent government and make it run like a business vertical in the Trump White House. However, a quick scroll down the front page shows me that I cannot find that anymore. It's been overtaken by other events, and maybe I can sort of Google that one if we want to talk about that. She had some sort of, I thought, maybe possibly interesting insight into exactly what it was that made her think he was such a terrible person for the job. But by the time like I said, by the time I find this, the guy's already in Iraq, and it's not even the top story about Jared Kushner anymore. I don't know. I find that rather amazing. Let's see if I can find out of Google News this Kushner story. Let's see. I mean, Kushner's, all the top stories will be about him in Iraq. Let's see. Is there any way I can continue that I can find this? Maybe this is it. No, that was I don't know. See, I thought I was going to finally get around to, there it is. I was finally going to get around to some of the Kushner profiles. Okay, and Greg just found it. I just found it here too. I worked for Jared Kushner. He's the wrong businessman to reinvent government. Is that what you sent me here? Let's see, Greg. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so why is he the wrong person? I don't know. We'll have to ask Elizabeth Spears how the New York Observer could predict the fate of the Office of American Innovation. Let's take a look. And there's a little video here. Who is Jared Kushner? And it's a minute and 41 seconds worth of who he is that I hope will be reflected in the text, because I'm not going to play you a almost 2-minute video clip that will only get me in copyright trouble. What do you think this is? Some sort of... Okay. On my first day at work, as the editor-in-chief of the New York Observer, which had been acquired 5 years earlier by Jared Kushner for no apparent reason, now the son-in-law and senior advisor to President Trump, I inherited an office and a desktop computer, both in fine but used condition. The computer was a recent model Mac, but when I turned it on, it was inexplicably running Windows. I summoned our beleaguered IT guy to explain, and he informed me that it belonged to Kushner, who liked the design of Apple products but preferred the Windows OS. Wow, my son would like to have a talk with that guy about that. So he was basically using a $2,500 desktop as a monitor, I asked. The IT guy shrugged. I guess if you got enough money, you make mistakes like that. But yeah, that's a bad indication right off the bat. I need to trim down government and the way it works in order to save money. And the way I'm going to do it is I want to buy a nice looking Mac that runs Windows inside. I could see where, if you have enough money, you want things the way you want them, right? High maintenance, as they say in When Harry Met Sally. But I don't know. Honestly, my son should talk with him. Like he says, my son actually does not enjoy the Apple aesthetic for whatever reason, and he thinks that Mac things look ridiculous, and he likes the Windows environment. And I can't imagine why you would want. He'd be interested to know, why would you want to ruin the fine functioning? And Mac people will of course laugh at this, and I think I'm becoming more of a Mac person myself. I have both. I was traditionally PC, but the radio production job has turned me into a Mac person, and I always liked the design of it better, and I think I've come to enjoy the OS a little bit more too. My son says no, he loves the PC Windows environment, and can't understand probably why anyone would ruin that by surrounding it with the garbage design from Apple. I don't know, but then again, like Donald Trump says, they won and we didn't, so that must be right, and this is wrong. Anyway, in retrospect, our writer continues, this tiny moment seems like a metaphor. Frankensteining two products you appreciate into one product you appreciate even more isn't irrational. It's even creative in a way. On the other hand, why did the newspaper's owner need a $2,500 monitor? How was it anything but a vanity object? That's the problem. That moment in 2011 came back to me when the Trump administration announced this past week that Kushner would lead the newly created Office of American Innovation to infuse fresh thinking, quote unquote, infuse fresh thinking into government institutions by utilizing the hard-won knowledge of great American business executives. The appointment was announced with a breathlessness that suggests no one had ever thought of it before, or that former great American business executives have never worked in government until now. But I worked for Kushner 18 months as he tried to infuse a much smaller institution than the U.S. government with cost-cutting impulses from the commercial real estate world. And my experience doesn't bode well for the Office of American Innovation. Not everything that works in the private sector is transferable to the public sector, and even if it were, Kushner isn't the best person to transfer it. I was the youngest editor in the Observer's history, and not an obvious choice, but Kushner liked me because I had been the founding editor of Gawker, which had grown into one of the largest indie media companies in the country, with more than 100 million unique visitors a month, and because I had an entrepreneurial and digital background. I also had started a Wall Street site he'd considered acquiring, and I was the only candidate he interviewed who asked to see the Observer's financials before I would take the job. Almost 40% of my compensation was in the form of a performance bonus contingent upon hitting growth milestones while staying under budget. I was fine with being held accountable. I viewed the paper as a business, just as Kushner did. But I resigned in 2012 for a variety of reasons, chiefly that the president of the company and I couldn't persuade Kushner to recapitalize the Observer, even though I'd reached all my numbers. When the paper had a profitable quarter for what I was told was the first time, Kushner floated the idea of layoffs to increase the margins, seemingly ignoring the fact that staff reductions would also reduce ad inventory by reducing content. A material part of what had been attractive about the job was the promise of expansion and growth, but we submitted business plans over and over again and Kushner rejected them. He wanted the Observer to be cheaper to run, usually at the expense of growth and evolution, and he could not see the relationship between scale and profit, between risk and reward. How could that be? The White House did not answer a request from the Washington Post to provide Kushner's perspective for this story, by the way. He viewed investments in terms of opportunity costs. Why should I put more money into the Observer when I could invest in a software company, he would say. This is a legitimate question for any returns-driven investor, but news media doesn't scale like software. You need people to produce the content, at least until artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated and sensitive sources are willing to trust a bot. Why would you buy a newspaper if you expect it to scale the way software does? Why assume that media and software have the same risk profile and dynamics? Kushner would frequently point to a media company with a 60-person editorial staff and ask why our 2-person desk wasn't producing as many stories or as much traffic. Or he'd argue, bizarrely and incorrectly, that because Gawker started with 1 person, that meant you didn't need headcount to scale a media company. The internet makes media more scalable, of course. Distribution is unlimited and gained at little marginal cost, but that doesn't mean a media company is just like Uber. Wow. That same obsession with the tech world permeates Kushner's new project. Cost cutting is important in situations where there is excess, but it is not what catalyzes evolution. If the point here is to make government more effective, not just more efficient, cuts alone won't do it. The Silicon Valley entrepreneurs Kushner has roped into helping him with the new office, such as Apple's Tim Cook, Salesforce boss Mark Benioff, and Tesla founder Elon Musk, would be the first to tell him, if they were honest, I guess, we'll have to add that scale is important and that growth is often a function of prioritizing R&D investments. You prototype cheaply to get a minimum viable product, but if you stop there, you're in trouble. You have to reinvest constantly. Lessons from Silicon Valley are even likelier to be misapplied in government than in media. Outside experts always groan that government institutions are running outdated systems that still rely on floppy disks, and that this is a function of some combination of government waste, idiocy, and ubiquitous Ludditism. But a more logical explanation is that system upgrades require appropriations, many of which have been gleefully slashed by Congress. There's also the problem of government pay and the fact that the private sector has financial resources that the government does not. Is it reasonable to expect speedy, high-quality upgrades when engineers are making $90,000 a year and implementations are often contracted out to the lowest bidder? The irrelevance of private sector nostrums is likely to haunt Kushner's new initiative. They're all outsiders and nobody knows anything about the government, says Elaine Camark, I'm guessing, who worked for Vice President Al Gore when the Clinton administration sought to reinvent government 25 years ago, and who is now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. It will take these people a year just to figure out what they're doing. There are many government functions that have no analog in the private sector, she pointed out, like maintaining a nuclear arsenal. The Clinton administration's efforts had some success, Camark said, because Gore's group was staffed primarily by government people and civil servants who worked in concert with private sector experts. They also have to staff the government, she said, pointing to the Trump administration's failure to fill hundreds of crucial positions so far, leaving any ideas that the new organization produces without a government to execute them. Kushner's claim to business knowledge, beyond admiring Silicon Valley, boils down to his work for his family's commercial real estate company, which is hardly comparable to a government institution. And if industry dynamics are not transitive across the board, expertise isn't either. On that count, I don't even know how to quantify Kushner's expertise anyway. Yes, he ran the company, which he inherited, not uncommon in New York's dynastic insular real estate world, but he was sure he had the goods. When I worked for him, I didn't think he had a realistic view of his own capabilities since, like his father-in-law, he seemed to view his wealth and its concomitant accoutrements as rewards for his personal success in business, and not something he would have had in any case. To me, he appeared to view his position and net worth as the products of an essentially meritocratic process. Yet, when Kushner Company bought 666 Fifth Avenue, yes, remember that he owns 666 Fifth Avenue, for $1.8 billion in 2007, it was the largest transaction for a commercial real estate building in Manhattan's history. Had the financing gone south, as it nearly did, and there's a linked story for that, it probably would have destroyed the family's fortune. He was that close. The building is heavily in debt now and in need of new investors to let Vornado, a real estate firm that owns 49.5% of it, get out. Discussions with Chinese insurance giant Anbang fell apart this past week. I didn't even realize that. Is this good deal making? I don't know. If I were to assume any expertise I have is transitive to the commercial real estate world, I might argue that Kushner's company overpaid for the building in the first place and over-leveraged itself. But I also know what I don't know, and I don't make a living using vast amounts of debt to buy Class A office buildings in New York. So I will defer to people who do to opine. You could construe my evaluation as a reasonable observation by an outsider with a set of fresh eyes, but you'd be nuts to hand me $1 billion commercial real estate company because of it. When it became clear in 2012 that Kushner was conflating running lean with starvation, I submitted my resignation and left the Observer, mostly on good terms with him, but I was disappointed. The company president resigned a few weeks later. Kushner eventually filled our positions with a family friend and his brother-in-law, the latter of whom had no media experience whatsoever. He wanted outsiders to run the business, but loyal, compliant outsiders. A few days after Trump won the election, Kushner folded the now attenuated print newspaper and subsequently announced that the Observer, in its digital incarnation, was for sale. He probably would refer to it as a lean operation. I would say in his zeal to trim the fat, he began eliminating muscle and hacked into a few bones. I realize also in retrospect that he may never have intended to grow it or improve it. It was, for him, in essence, another vanity object, like the beautiful, expensive desktop computer he used as a monitor. I worry that this new office will be more of the same. A vanity project, one that exists primarily to put Kushner in the same room with people he admires, whom he wouldn't have had access to before, glossing government agencies in the process with a thin veneer of what appears to be capitalism but is really just nihilistic cost-cutting, designed to project the optics of efficiency. If the outside experts have good advice, it will be heeded only where it reinforces what the administration would do anyway. And anyone who volunteers to carry out the administration's agenda may be handed wholesale control of an area of government where their domain expertise isn't just low, but non-existent. But I would like to be a fly on the wall when Kushner expresses his feelings to Tim Cook about the Macintosh operating system. That could be interesting. All right. Well, gave us pretty good insight into where he's coming from. I still have in pocket, I think, time has passed us by on these things, but lots of profiles from the early days of just who is this Jared Kushner guy. I don't know if we would already have known this, but we really didn't pay enough attention to Kushner. And it's every time they assign him some huge new portfolio, I think, well, that's got to be it. That's got to be the last time they dump another one of these on him. And I guess that's never going to stop. So it's about time we jump in and take a look at this. All right. Let's see. Other pieces of the puzzle from the weekend that deserve attention. Let's skim over these things, and we'll at least acknowledge that each of these things happened, that I put some of these things aside. And if you have more that you think I need to put in pocket and mention briefly and ignore, or actually read and discuss, please send them my way, of course, either via Twitter at KagroX, or you can add an @gmail.com and get me via email, and we'll see if we can't shoehorn that bit of information into our collection. Let's see. There's where do we want to go next on this one? This was an interesting piece, and I set aside both Judd Legum's tweet on it pointing to a Think Progress piece. Did he write it? Yeah, he did, on it, and also a Slate story on it. And let's see. Let's start with Slate, because I like their headlines. The Think Progress headline is, "In epic letter, investment fund fires law firm for enabling the Trump kleptocracy." Now, what is it that I would say? There must be some kind of amazing headline over at Slate to draw me in that direction. Well, it's both. There's both the headline and the writers. I like the idea of this being treated by both Judd Legum at Think Progress, but also Dahlia Lithwick at Slate. With stunning moral clarity, Wallace Global Fund fires the firm that endorsed Donald Trump's kleptocracy. So here's what's going on. We'll take a look at Dahlia Lithwick's write-up of this. Every once in a while, amid the legal and ethical sham of the Trump presidency, the grown-ups do show up to assert themselves. And each time they do, the world briefly makes sense again. This week, the grown-up is H. Scott Wallace, co-chair of the Wallace Global Fund. Doesn't think too much of himself, I guess, which promotes sustainable investments and, until very recently, received legal counsel from the same firm that helped Donald Trump, quote, separate, and it is in scare quotes, separate from his business interests before assuming the presidency. You remember this sham? In a letter explaining his decision to fire that law firm, Morgan, Lewis, and Bockius, Wallace leaves no doubt that the ethical carnage sanctioned by the firm's lawyers is not tolerable or normal or even minimally defensible. It's an interesting thing. It's one thing to say, God, they did such a stupid whitewash job on them. You wonder about the competence of these lawyers, or at least, how much are they willing to sell out? If you pay them enough, they'll literally will just give their stamp of approval to this stuff and say, as officers of the court, it's not a court proceeding that's going on, but, as lawyers, as attorneys, as licensed professionals, we think this is okay. Do I want those guys representing me? I mean, it's funny because some business people would say, yes, absolutely. That means I can buy their rubber stamp later. Well, this is what I guess is what makes this so stunning, both to Judd Legum and Dahlia Lithwick, that this guy is like, danger, warning, this is a huge red flag. My lawyers might suck. But not only might they suck, I'm probably a pretty rich guy and a pretty good client for that reason. I'm going to make a noisy exit from this. It's usually the lawyers that end up making noisy exits. As clients, it's, I think, pretty rare. The letter, she continues, addressed to the firm's chair, Jamie McKeon, and first reported by Politico. Okay. So there's an awful lot of people picking up on this from Politico. Expressly calls out the firm's representation of Donald Trump and the legal advice given by Morgan Lewis partner Sherry Dillon. Dillon is the lawyer who stood next to piles of presumably empty manila folders, remember that, and the president at a January 11th press conference to defend Trump's decision not to place his business in a blind trust, but instead to set up a trust managed by his sons, of which he still maintains full ownership, allowing him to profit from his presidency. Wallace, who appeals to McKeon as, quote, a fellow Villanova law grad, unquote, does not mince his words. We believe that the legal advice given to him by your partner is not just simplistic and ill-founded, but that it empowers and even encourages impeachable offenses and undetectable financial conflicts of interest by America's highest official, and thus it is an unprecedented invitation to corruption and assault on our democracy. Yikes. It goes on to ask that the firm, quote, think about larger principles than simple zealous representation of a client, unquote. The letter then catalogs in detail the myriad ways in which Trump's continuing conflicts of interest and self-dealing violate the Constitution's Emoluments Clause and characterize Dillon's solution as, quote, an illusion of protection against the president using his office for personal gain, unquote. It goes on to detail corruption-related developments since that January press conference, ranging from the granting of 38 trademarks to Trump by China, his D.C. hotels courting foreign business away from other venues, and the doubling of initiation fees at Mar-a-Lago. The Wallace Fund, by the way, describes itself as a, quote, funder and supporter of social movements. In his letter, Wallace says the fund's values of open and accountable democratic governance have been violated by the sham fig leaf arrangements Morgan Lewis has devised and endorsed. As Wallace concludes, it is painfully obvious that Trump is using his office for financial gain, and Morgan Lewis is enabling and legitimizing this. Sometimes just calling corruption corruption is enough to refocus the mind. This simple letter reminds us how dramatically our conception of what is normal has been redefined in recent months. Very true. I'm curious about whether over at Think Progress there's any additional angle on this, but yeah, it's damn interesting, and unfortunately, just not really. I don't even know if it's cracking the top 10 of crazy things that are happening these days and getting attention for it. Let's take a look at the Think Progress piece here. The Wallace Global Fund is sick of pretending. In a scathing letter, the investment fund fired its elite law firm, Morgan Lewis, for its role in enabling Donald Trump to use the presidency to line his pockets. They're just recounting the story here. In January, Sherry Dillon publicly signed off on Trump's plan to maintain ownership of his business empire while president. Instead, Dillon established a variety of measures that fell well short of the steps recommended by the Office of Government Ethics. Trump, meanwhile, is not even hiding his efforts to use the prestige of his presidency for profit. He has spent the last 9 consecutive weekends at Trump-branded properties. Now, one of Morgan Lewis's clients has had enough. In his letter, the Wallace Global Fund chief accuses Morgan Lewis of abetting corruption and an assault on our democracy. So a piece of the letter is reprinted herein, a PDF of it. The Office of Government Ethics has recommended that in order to avoid conflicts of interest while he occupies the White House, Trump should divest from his business assets through a blind trust. Instead, Morgan Lewis signed off on a plan for Trump to hand over operational control of his businesses to his 2 sons and another long-term executive. The plan also established a hand-picked ethics advisor who would sign off on new deals struck by the Trump organization while Trump is president. The Wallace Fund writes that Morgan Lewis has legitimized a complete non-solution to Trump's manifold conflicts, both foreign and domestic. Indeed, Eric Trump recently revealed that he is in regular contact with his father and will update him quarterly on the financial performance of his companies. The Wallace Fund also blasts Morgan Lewis for largely ignoring the constitutional prohibition on presidents receiving payments from foreign governments. Trump will reportedly donate the, quote, profits from foreign governments spending money at his hotels, a step that has been widely dismissed as insufficient and unenforceable, including here on this show. A business partner of Trump's in Las Vegas recently revealed that Trump is not taking steps to segregate profits from foreign governments at the hotel there. But of course, I never promised that I was going to separate out the profits from Las Vegas. I said the D.C. hotel, but what difference does it make, right? The letter ticks through the ethical carnage that has piled up since Morgan Lewis blessed Trump's plan. We heard them in Dahlia Lithwick's piece, the Mar-a-Lago doubling. The courting of foreign governments at Trump's D.C. hotel, the Chinese patents, etc. America deserves a president of trademarks, rather. America deserves a president of undivided loyalty. Your firm has denied them that. We cannot be complicit in that. The letter concludes. Very interesting. The point is the same, but they each took different clips. Interestingly enough, so. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a good point, and the fact that this guy is himself a Villanova law grad makes it of some interest as well, just from the lawyering perspective. You can't just sit around. Well, one, you can't run a fund that's represented by this firm and trust that you're getting good advice when you see the same firm doing something so blatantly wrong for Trump. So you need to get out of there. Making it a noisy exit, well, that was optional. I'm glad they did it. It won't make much difference, unfortunately, I don't think. And I don't know, maybe I guess it'll end up being something of a good lesson that Mr. Wallace of Wallace Global Funds will find that even big-time law firm losing his big-time business will be like, what can you do? Clients come and clients go. And maybe it'll give him a new, humbler perspective on where Wallace Global Funds really stands on the globe. But, maybe he was under no illusions at all in the first place. But he said, this is something we can do. We can make a little news for ourselves. After all, if we're in the business of investing in sustainability, that makes us a good bet to drum up business from some of the people who will probably consider themselves part of the resistance. But if they happen to be sitting on a pile of cash, they can resist while still investing, and they can invest with us. This is as good a PR move as any for them. I don't begrudge them that. It still seems pretty heartfelt. Maybe he knew where he stood in the world from start to finish. But it needed to be said, and we're glad he said it. And I'm glad that both Judd and Dahlia have picked up on this article. It'll get some coverage. I feel like we owed it a little more than it's likely to get elsewhere in the media. So, okay. Glad we brought you that one. Let's see. So many stories here. How to choose where to go next. Let's see. Maybe we can skip around a little bit and throw a few extra things in there to really round stuff out. Let's see. I'm not quite sure what to make of this bit here. There is a new storyline that is connected, one, to the Russia story, which is still very relevant, unless you're coming at this from the Glenn Greenwald camp angle, which thinks we're overplaying the Russia thing entirely. And I don't know. I'm reluctant to dip a foot into this stream because here, two streams that I don't like very much meet. One, relitigating the primary stream as between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and their supporters. And two, the Russia stream, which many of the people who were very ardent Sanders supporters, and more importantly, Sanders supporters and Hillary opponents, I think that overlaps very strongly with the group that thinks we're overplaying the Russia story, and it's led to a whole post-primary, indeed post-general election battle along the same lines, including many of the same personnel, I guess we could say, having a fight over whether or not thinking that you've overplayed the Russia story either makes you, marks you as continually fighting the anti-Clinton battle, and perhaps in the same way Trump is, or worse, people have gotten so used to, during the primary fights, making the battles so personal that a good portion of my Twitter feed gets overwhelmed every once in a while with accusations that people like Glenn Greenwald are themselves Russian agents. And that there I at least can say, all right, now I do feel like we're getting back into the anachronism of the Cold War here, and accusing one another of being Russian stooges. There are some Russian stooges out there. I don't know how far that really reaches. Anyway, I don't know. I'm trying to be sympathetic. I don't. You're not likely to convince me as much as you may, or as often and as deeply as you may disagree with Glenn Greenwald, and some of you do not. But those of you who do, convincing me that he is actually getting paid by the Russians to minimize the Russia story, I don't think is going to work. I think he's got his opinion. I think he's got his stance laid out, and I don't think he's likely to be dislodged from it. And I don't know what the motivations are, but I can say you got a lot of work ahead of you if you want to convince me that the motivation is that he's simply taking money from Russia to do this. I don't know why, but likewise, I don't know why they would bother to do that. And I guess if anything, the people that tend to occupy that position tend not to motivate themselves with paychecks the same way they do over on the other side, on the Republican side of the equation. It just doesn't happen all that often on the Democratic side. But I guess Russian assets are perhaps less limited, but yeah, I don't know. That's the sort of thing where I don't necessarily believe that some Republican and conservative operatives would pass up a fat paycheck even if there was a terrible name attached to it. I do think that's still the case. Even for Glenn Greenwald, he will still pass up. I don't know. But maybe I'm just guessing, and maybe I'm giving him too much benefit of the doubt. I don't know. But I want to get off of that and get on to this other storyline, which could be of some serious interest. I have two related stories, one from the Huffington Post, which is a little older, and one, the newer angle on ShareBlue.com, which has been very interesting over the last couple of days. Now ShareBlue is a relatively new outlet, as I recall, and I've been seeing it crop up quite a bit. And the folks who make the place up, they're beginning to amass a very interesting roster. Oliver Willis now there. Tommy Christopher has been there for a little while longer. But I don't know. To me, his history has been a little bit more mixed. Oliver Willis, I like a great deal, and we cross paths a lot on Twitter. But he occasionally strays a little further from where I am too, but less so. Tommy Christopher usually makes me gasp, and I say, "Well, I don't know if I'm willing to jump out over there," but it usually can bring me along once in a while. And Kylie Joy Gray now also over there, and my inclination is to think that much more of ShareBlue these days as they expand their roster. The piece I'm thinking of, though, it's interesting, it's controversial, and I've seen people take different sides on it, even among the progressive blogosphere. But let's consider this possibility. Watching the hearings, written here by Leah McElrath, I'm hoping I'm getting your last name right. Watching the hearings, I learned and it's the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings we're talking about. I learned my Bernie bro harassers, and I remember we try to avoid the whole Bernie bro thing, but it comes up every once in a while. But check this out. I learned my Bernie bro harassers may have been Russian bots. It's interesting because I'm seeing pushback on this from the other quarters, the very strong Bernie Sanders supporters and people who think we've overplayed the Russia story. They're like, oh, come on, now everything's a Russian bot. But you know what? I mean, I think it's better for the Bernie supporters. I mean, why isn't it a good story? It's a terrible story that it even happened, but why isn't it, is it not a good thing to find out if it's true? And I mean, you always got to question whether it's true. Fair enough. But isn't it I don't know. I'm relieved by the possibility, and I can't say I'm buying it entirely. Not yet, but I'm open to the possibility. I'm relieved by the possibility that the people who Hillary Clinton supporters during the primaries ran into and had so much trouble with and described as Bernie bros, and that drove Bernie supporters up the wall if they weren't that kind of person. Many of them believed, oh, well, these people, they don't even exist. And the Hillary Clinton supporters would say, I can show you my mentions. It's overflowing with this stuff. How could it not be? Well, if it was Russian bots or Russian trolls or God knows what combination of the two, isn't that a good thing that we find out? No, there really weren't legions of mostly male Bernie Sanders supporters who made a daily practice of harassing Hillary Clinton supporters in ways that are unacceptable under any definition of liberal progressivism. Because that was a huge problem, and they were seeing it, and it was ridiculous to deny that they were seeing it. But now, if it was outside agitators, as they also used to say back in the anachronistic way of the era that I keep hoping that our worries don't hearken back to, isn't it better if it was really someone who was just out trolling and wasn't really a Bernie Sanders supporters? Okay, here we go. Let's say so. Thank you, HD Greg, telling me Share Blue is David Brock's effort to make a Breitbart of the left. Personally, I don't consider that an admirable objective, he says. Yeah, I get you. And that wouldn't be one I would want to necessarily admit to, although it is funny in a way. I mean, I do feel like sometimes you want to step up your street fight game a little bit. But yeah, I wouldn't admit to or I wouldn't really want to adhere to the idea of making a Breitbart of the left, particularly because it's always been such a bomb for the right to say they want to make, they're imitating something successful on the left and they want to have something like that on the right. It's never worked for them. And also, I don't know. I mean, I'm tempted every once in a while to say, well, what if we just launched a bunch of fake news and maybe we would come to benefit by that. And, of course, eventually your conscience catches up with you and whatever. And I know, I can tell him right away, just knowing the dynamics of David Brock and who he is and what he does and HD Greg and who you are and what you do. Yeah, that's not going to mix real well. I see what you're getting at here. I like Oliver Willis. I'm sure you are at odds with him every once in a while or maybe every day. Anyway, but this is what makes it even more interesting. Okay, so do we think that David Brock is directing here as part of an effort to become the Breitbart of the left? Why is it? I'm not certain that it hurts Bernie Sanders or Bernie Sanders supporters. I think it actually, to me, in my mind, it helps, but maybe I'm just being too conciliatory for everybody. It helps to find out that, yeah, the worst elements of what Hillary Clinton supporters, vocal supporters on social media were seeing purportedly from Bernie Sanders supporters never really was from Bernie Sanders supporters. I think there's something for everybody to take away from that. One, Hillary Clinton supporters can now reevaluate what they think about Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders supporters in a good way. I mean, there can be some sort of reconciliation here, not the congressional procedure, but the regular layperson's understanding of reconciliation. If it turns out that it wasn't real, honest to God, grassroots American voting supporters of Bernie Sanders that were doing that to them, that's great. And likewise, Sanders supporters can say, well, not only was that not us, but they can say, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're also sort of, some of them are stuck defending the idea that Russia really has nothing to do with it. So they can't, I don't know, is it that they can't accept that sort of assistance? If on the one hand, I want to be able to say that wasn't a real Bernie Sanders supporter. Okay, well then who was it? Well, it was a Russian troll or a Russian bot. Okay, but then last week you said we were overstating how much influence the Russians had or tried to exercise on the election, and aren't you wrong about that? This would be a good opportunity to say, I might have been wrong about that, as a matter of fact. Yes, so even more reconciliation, but apparently that's not happening yet. Well, let's see what the kind of evidence they bring to bear. I guess I haven't even gotten to that part of the story. It's just so fascinating, the dynamics around the possibilities, that I'm stuck on that. So what does Leah McElrath have to say in Share Blue? When it was revealed during the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing that Russian bots, here parenthetically it says computer algorithm controlled social media accounts on Twitter, had masqueraded as Bernie Bros during the 2015 and 16 election cycles, it was not news to me. It was confirmation of my experience. Wasn't news? Well, okay. I don't know whether that's really the right phrasing, but it was certainly, it didn't come as a surprise, perhaps. But did you know, did anybody know that it was the so-called Bernie Bros were in fact Russian bots? Or we also need to get some definitions down about whether they're bots, like are there actual people behind it besides the programming? Or are they just trolls, people who are paid to spend their day annoying other people on Twitter? That's a different sort of a thing. Anyway, let's find out what they have to say here. During the campaign season, I was vocal on Twitter about my support for Hillary Clinton. As a result, I became used to receiving sexualized and gendered abuse and even rape and death threats on a daily basis. And that surprised the hell out of a lot of people, because there were a lot of people, of course, out there supporting Bernie Sanders who said, no, people who support, what sense does it make that people who support Bernie Sanders would engage in that kind of behavior? That's just the wrong profile entirely. Now, of course, there's always somebody somewhere in every camp who's an outlier, but I mean, in such numbers that you should all be getting these things. And it infuriated Bernie Sanders supporters because they weren't doing it, and they didn't probably even know anybody who was. Somebody was, though. How do you explain it? To me, this seems like a plausible explanation, I guess. A great deal of the abuse came from so-called #MAGA, Make America Great accounts. The Make America Great Again hashtag, by which Donald Trump supporters and those pretending to be such identified themselves. As more and more information came out about Trump's ties to Russia, I began to suspect, correctly, this is a hell of a guess, really, if you guessed before this hearing, that many of these accounts were not real people, but rather were accounts with fake identities or bots. Indeed, some estimates now say that as much as 1/5 of Twitter traffic was controlled by pro-Trump, anti-Clinton bots and troll accounts during the election. That would be amazing. With these MAGA account attacks, it was relatively easy to block them and move on, emotionally at least, as the abuse they delivered was easy to deflect because they were not people with whom I believed I had values in common in the first place. However, the rest of the abuse came from accounts purporting to be supporters of Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. And these were, quote, people, unquote, with whom I believed I shared common values and policy interests. Almost all of the accounts presented as men, mostly young and white, and used sexist and misogynistic tones and words. I was called mom and grandma as epithets by these young men. I was called every vile sexualized name you can imagine. For some reason that I did not understand at the time, this is interesting, they like to call me a vagina. That's the word that they use. I now believe that non-native English, i.e. Russian speakers, wrote the algorithms controlling these bots and perhaps imagined the word vagina to be the equivalent of the C word when hurled at a woman. Not being conversant in the mechanisms of Russian psychological warfare techniques at the time, it never occurred to me that like the MAGA bots, these Bernie Bro accounts were actually bots too. That's a possibility. It's a weird thing to just call someone, although I guess I could come up with some sort of alternative explanation for it, but I don't know. And the abuse, she continues, from these accounts was much harder to dismiss. It went in further, emotionally speaking. The vitriol of the attacks felt like a painful betrayal. After all, we, quote unquote, we probably shared 99% of our political perspective. We just supported different candidates, which is something I said repeatedly in my attempts to appeal to reason with some of the attackers over the course of these long months. Okay. I mean, again, that's open to some interpretation. It's entirely possible that many Bernie Sanders supporters in good standing, who are real people and not robots, might dispute the 99 figure, but it's easy to see that, even in the heat of a primary, things shouldn't be quite this vicious. On the other hand, I do remember that a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who were convinced and may still be convinced and may not have all that, it may not be all that much of a stretch to you got to entertain once in a while, although lots of people say it's ridiculous to even entertain it. It may hurt your brain to entertain it, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. That is, of course, the possibility that Bernie Sanders might have won the election against Donald Trump. I can't point to anything that I think is solid enough to say yes, no, but okay, being open to the possibility. That's all. And they will say, well, then the primary was our last chance to do this thing right, and I felt passionately about it, and look at what a disaster we have now with Trump in place, and I blame it on, okay, so you all know the story, and so that might explain some of the passion, perhaps. But this might as well, right? Nonetheless, even the mildest criticism of Sanders, again, remember whose perspective this is, the mildest criticism of Sanders or comment of support for Clinton would bring out a swarm of these Bernie Bro accounts spouting off with abusive language and mockery. But I think we can all probably agree that when there was abusive language and mockery, that was a problem. Particularly if it was real people doing it who are now, of course, saying, if they were real people then they would likely now, as real people, be listening closely when Bernie Sanders says, let us not mock those who were Trump voters. Let us reach out and understand. It would be very interesting, but not entirely out of keeping with human nature, right? It's not that they have to be robots in order to explain the fact that with fellow progressives, they were vicious, but with Trump voters, they're actually, offering some sort of outreach and compassion. Why? You would think, well, that's nonsense. How in the world could you possibly? But just thinking about things like regular little family dynamic stuff, sometimes you notice things like sometimes you might find yourself being sharper, more biting, more sarcastic, just a little, or maybe a whole lot tougher and more rough-edged and meaner sometimes in dealing with members of your own family than you would ever be with anyone you might be otherwise either casually acquainted with or a coworker or complete strangers. There are things that you would never do, places you'd never go with people outside the family, and then the people you're supposed to be closest with and have the strongest bonds with and love the most, and you're the worst to them. Could that translate into primary fights versus general election divisions? I don't know. Ballerina X commenting on this one. Some could have been bots in social media, and I would imagine they would try it. But I and others had some weird and scary experiences. In real life, in early spring of 16, bots set a tone. Yeah, it's entirely possible. There's got to be. There's just too. When you have that number of people involved in a situation like this, there's going to be outliers. And sometimes outliers drag other outliers along with them and encourage or appear to permit behavior that even other people wouldn't necessarily have engaged in on their own. It's definitely a difficult thing to parse, and I don't think that they have successfully parsed it just yet, but I definitely want to entertain the possibility, because anything that could help explain this at this point, it would be very welcome. I have to be on guard against being too accepting of this conclusion, but I guess I'll acknowledge I kind of hope this is true. It was not just me who experienced this, our writer tells us. Nearly every female supporter of Clinton I know who was outspoken on Twitter or Facebook received similar treatment. In addition, men of color who were vocal Clinton supporters were targeted in a similar way. The abuse was also highly targeted toward journalists, especially female journalists, reporting on the primary, and opinion journalists who were supportive of Clinton. None of us knew we were being targeted for psychological warfare by a foreign power during these exchanges. And it might be that you didn't know it because you weren't, but it would be very interesting to find out that you were. The attack started in late 2015 and escalated through early 2016. Most of these accounts no longer exist to link to, but others on Twitter noticed similar patterns. Embedded here is a John Aravosis tweet saying, and attacking my 86-year-old mother, seriously, repeatedly, and en masse, is part of the new low by Sanders supporters. It's bizarre. This would have been April 18th of last year. Leah answering here, for what it's worth, I am not infrequently called mom or grandma as a slur by Sanders supporters on here. And, yeah, that's, I mean, I remember it. I saw it. I did see people at least complaining about it. I didn't experience it directly, and that's partially because I'm male, probably. I'm not the primary target for these things. And two, you know, it would be awfully hard to nail me down as a hardcore supporter of either of the two candidates, and that was largely on purpose, and it wouldn't have made a great deal of sense. And also, I rather than go to the block, I go to the filter very often. I just very often just mute people that are that much of an irritant, and I have no doubt that I muted the vast majority of the bots that might otherwise have honed in on me. I'm sure I missed some interesting input along the way with some false positives as well, but I stayed relatively sane, and so it was worth doing. All right, so let's see. What else does Leah have to say in the article here? There's a couple other embedded tweets, but I think I don't know. I think we get the idea from these. Let me continue on with the article. The experience was confusing and deeply concerning. I worried if my generation of feminists had missed huge numbers of young men self-identifying as progressives who so clearly hated women. I worried for my daughter's future as she grows up and enters into a world populated by such supposed allies. It was even worse when I spoke to friends who were Sanders supporters. They often didn't believe the Bernie bro phenomenon I described had any basis in reality. It simply did not match with their experience of Sanders supporters. They believed their reality and I believed mine. And I believed both of them at the same time, because it doesn't match with my experience of real, honest-to-God, actual people, Sanders supporters. And it doesn't match my understanding of Hillary Clinton supporters that I knew, telling me these stories, that they would make those stories up. That didn't match either. Leah continues here, even my own mother, who was a Sanders supporter, did not fully believe me about the extent until I showed her my Twitter mentions. As a result of this dynamic, divisions in relationships were created that had never before existed. People with common values and political goals became highly and bizarrely polarized and isolated. And that really makes it sound like, you know, what other conclusion do you draw if you're aware of the possibility of Russian interference. You're like, well, that's certainly the goal they were after. How did it come to pass without their resorting to this kind of interference? It would be coincidental, and it would be, I think, relatively unlikely, but it would be very likely to be the result, to explain why we were seeing it. It would be very likely, I think, to conclude that if you were getting the very result that any outside power, Russians, whoever, if they had the resources, if you could pull that kind of trick, if you could divide the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or the entire party such that it would be rendered ineffective and they might end up losing the election, I mean, that would be a tall order. I don't know if I could have invented it if someone had asked me how to do it. This was very creative in a way, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how you get... This is clearly what they would have wanted if they could have designed anything, if they had a wish list. And this would certainly be on it. And the fact that they got to that and were known to be employing methods just like those at least being imagined here leads me to conclude, that's a fairly serious possibility. Leah continues here, the attacks worked. Some women left Twitter altogether as a result of the abuse. Even I became far less outspoken than I normally am in the face of it, and that's victory enough for these guys. A near vacuum of public expressions of support for Clinton came to exist on social media. Just what you don't want in the middle of a campaign for the presidency, right? On their end, Sanders supporters were flooded with a wave of anti-Clinton fake news stories. That's another of the issues, and a similar story. That's the one I had grabbed from the Huffington Post. Many Clinton supporters came to feel isolated, just as the Sanders supporters came to feel misrepresented. Many real people from both the Sanders and Clinton camps still harbor resentments toward the other. As importantly, we have no way of measuring the degree to which these types of active measure by Russia suppressed turnout of Clinton voters. That's a bit more of a jump. But yeah, I can see what she's getting at here. That sort of inexplicable division and anger and resentment. It almost reminds me of the scene from, I don't know, I lose track of which one of the Harry Potter movies it is. I mean, the heroes of the movie, the best friends, Harry and Hermione and Ron are at one another's throats, but it's because they've been handling the Horcrux all that time, and it's sort of affecting their moods and emotions and perceptions. People here may have been manipulated into this. One thing we know for sure, it certainly suppressed our voices. That would be the Clinton supporters, and that's goal enough, even if they didn't really think they'd get to the end point of actually sowing division. The first time I knew the MAGA hashtag accounts had been bots, and the first time it occurred to me that the Bernie Bro accounts might also have been, was on November 9th, the day after the election. The accounts went totally silent. That is just not a normal human reaction. I had expected them to be making victory laps on Twitter. In fact, they were not just silent. The vast majority of them were gone. Poof. I blocked thousands of these accounts on Twitter over the course of about 18 months. When I went to check my list of blocked accounts, there were about a dozen left in existence. Their job was done. Hillary Clinton had been defeated, and Donald Trump had been elected to the office of the President of the United States. But here is the good news. Those Bernie Bros, enclosed in quotes, a significant number of them, perhaps even the vast majority of them, were bots. They were not our progressive allies, weirdly hurling racist and misogynist language in overwhelming waves. Does that mean racism and sexism are no longer a problem on the left? Of course not. And we need to address it with our social and professional networks whenever we can, including discussion of the fault lines that were clumsily highlighted by Russian operatives. The challenge now is to mend these tears in the fabric of the Democratic Party that were exacerbated and sometimes created whole cloth by Russian active measures designed to destroy America from within by turning us against one another. We can all agree we face a real and present danger from the Trump presidency and GOP control of both houses of Congress. Witnessing the Republicans' heartlessness and destructive political goals laid bare, we can all now likely agree our differences are ones of degree rather than essential values. Our way is better than theirs. In the silence of the bots, we can hear there are so many more of us. Interesting, dangerous possibility, amazingly effective. What you can do with these things. In hindsight, it's quite obvious that it can be done, but amazing if it fooled everybody all the way through. The Huffington Post piece that I have at hand is a little bit older. Ryan Grimm and Jason Cherkis. This is back in early March that they wrote this. The Bernie Sanders campaign faced a fake news tsunami. Where did it come from? The trolls set out to distract and divide the invigorated left. Slightly different angle on the story here, being about fake news rather than fake people. Last June, John Mattis started noticing something coursing like a virus through the Facebook page he helped administer for Bernie Sanders fans in San Diego. People with no apparent ties to California were friending the page and sharing links from unfamiliar sites full of anti-Hillary Clinton propaganda. The stories they posted weren't the normal complaints he was used to seeing as the Vermont senator and the former Secretary of State fought out the Democratic presidential primary. These stories alleged that Clinton had murdered her political opponents and used body doubles. Mattis, 66, had been a television reporter and a Senate investigator in previous lives. He put his expertise in unmasking fraudsters to work. At first, he suspected that the sites were created by the old Clinton haters from the 90s, what Hillary Clinton had dubbed the vast right-wing conspiracy. But when Mattis started tracking down the site's domain registrations, the trail led to Macedonia and Albania. In mid-September, he emailed a few of his private investigator friends with a list of the sites. Very creepy, and I do not think Koch brothers, he wrote. Mattis and his friends didn't know what to make of his findings. He couldn't get his mind around the possibility that trolls overseas might be trying to sway a bunch of Southern Californians who supported Sanders' run for president. I may be a dark cynic, and I may have been an investigative reporter for a long time, but this was way too dark and too unbelievable and most upsetting. He said, what was I to do with this? By late October, Mattis said he'd traced 40% of the domain registrations for the fake news sites he saw popping up on pro-Sanders pages back to Eastern Europe. Others appeared to be based in Panama and the U.S. or were untraceable. He wondered, am I the only person seeing all this crap floating through these Bernie pages? He wasn't. Bernie supporters across the country had been noticing dubious websites and posters linked back to Eastern Europe long before Mattis did, and even before the Washington Post reported in mid-June that Russian government hackers had stolen emails from the Democratic National Committee. They had been warning each other that something weird was going on, posting troll alerts and compiling lists of fake news sites. There is enough real news to fight over, they thought, without arguing over anti-Hillary conspiracy theories from Macedonia. Sometimes it was hard to tell who was doing the trolling and for what purposes. Aletta Pierce, 54, who lives in Malibu, California, was an administrator of half a dozen pro-Sanders Facebook groups and a member of many others. In May of 2016, she posted a memo to various Facebook groups about the fake news issue, warning of bogus sites. The pattern I'm seeing is if a member is repeatedly posting articles that are from only one URL, that person is just there to push advertising. Pierce, or possibly Pearce, by the way, P-E-A-R-C-E, wrote, they probably have a sock account with little or no content. They are often from Russia or Macedonia. A sock, of course, being the sock puppet. Pierce added, please share this with other Bernie groups so we can put an end to this spam bombing that's filling up our pages and groups. It's time to chase the mice out of the henhouse and send them a message. They don't know who they're messing with, but I think they did know. The first tidal wave of spam was mostly anti-Bernie, Pearce recalled, posted by Clinton backers. David Brock's Clinton-backing super PAC had likely paid for some portion of those, according to a story linked herein. But after Clinton became the Democratic nominee in July, she noticed a switch to anti-Hillary messages with links to fake news and to real news with obnoxious pop-up ads. Every site publishing those, you clicked on the article, you'd be slammed with ads and strange articles, she told the Huffington Post. It was overwhelming, and it was 24/7. She kept a list of the fake news sites to watch for. It grew into dozens. There were posts on the Clinton has Parkinson's conspiracy and the Clinton is running a pedophilia ring out of a pizza shop conspiracy. On the Sanders campaign, it was Hector Segala's job to connect with all the organic Facebook groups, and he recalled seeing a lot of trolls trying to convince people of something that was obviously fake. Many of the interlopers, he said, claimed to be Sanders fans who had decided to vote for Republican nominee Donald Trump or Green Party candidate Jill Stein in the general election and tried to convince others to do likewise. It made it seem like the community as a whole was supporting that, but that wasn't the case. Segala thinks most of them were just your average internet trolls. He said he found many were members of 4chan, we all know about who they are, and a gathering place for the alt-right, white nationalists, and plain old nihilists, from which has sprung all manner of mischief. The Sanders campaign had begun seeing this particular brand of fake news starting in early 2016. The first time that we kind of fell for it for like 2 minutes was this link from what seemed to be ABC News, Segala said. It turned out to be abc.com.co, a fake site that has no affiliation with the real news network. It had, quote, reported that the Pope himself had endorsed Sanders. You remember a lot of this. You've probably seen a lot of it yourself. This is just a very interesting additional angle to it. We won't be able to get through all of it here, of course, this morning, but I wanted to put that side of it on the record, too. It really does begin to seem like there's something to it, and I'd be interested to see how this plays out in the minds of people who were Sanders fans and Sanders defenders, but who have likewise been very vocal in insisting that the Russia angle on these things isn't going to pan out and it's going to end up being an embarrassment. I'm very curious how this plays out, and gosh, I guess I'm just on guard about everything, which is, of course, exactly where you should be, not only in these strange times, but always. So, I don't know. We'll see. I thought that deserves some discussion. We're really going to have to hash some of that out. Maybe it'll be done offline, maybe not. There's many more stories to get to, of course. And, we'll hand things over now to the guys on the after show. And luckily I do have handy just a little bit of summary about what they'll be covering that we skipped today. And thank God for the after show, doing that job admirably almost every day. Let's see. The finances of Team Trump. Yes, reveal they are neck deep in the swamp. Trump's head of the National Trade Council hopes to profit from America's failure. I heard that story. And Mitch McConnell threatens to break the rules, to change the rules, to steal a Supreme Court vacancy. I didn't even get to that, but that's what's happening this week. We have to keep an eye on that, see whether they are going to deliver on their promise to install Gorsuch before the end of the week. On the last half, they report that Mike Pence's benevolent sexism is viewed by the antiquarians of the Republican Party as just a balance to Trump's more blatant sexism. And yes, there's more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this for examination on the last half? The surge in anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic sentiments mirrors the isolationist and xenophobic political climate between the First and Second World Wars. Not necessarily the brightest spot in American or world history. Always something to be on the lookout for. You can do that with Lincoln Justice next.